5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we're still trying to unravel the facts that led to one of the worst automotive tragedies of the last decade, and that's the installation of these faulty ignition switches in GM vehicles that we now have known has caused over a dozen deaths. These switches were bad from the start. They should have never been installed, and once they were installed, it became quickly clear to GM officials that something was very, very wrong with them. Disturbingly, the company left these unsafe vehicles on the road for over a decade. Mr. Valoukas, you've done important work describing how a defect known to GM employees for over a decade went unaddressed for so long. This report paints a troubling picture of GM's culture and commitment to safety that allowed this tragedy to take place. It describes engineering and investigative failures, a lack of urgency in addressing issues, poor communication within the company, and numerous other systemic problems. And, in the end, the company failed to inform customers and federal regulators of the deadly problem. But the report, unfortunately, does not answer all of the key questions. It does not fully explain how the ignition switch was approved without meeting specifications, and then how it was redesigned in 2006. It does not fully explain why stalling was not considered a safety issue within GM. And most troubling, as the chairman alluded to, the report does not fully explain how this dysfunctional company culture took root and persisted. The report singles out many individuals at GM who made poor decisions or failed to act, but it doesn't identify one individual in a position of high leadership who was responsible for these systemic failures. The report absolves previous CEOs, the legal department, Ms. Barra, and the GM board from knowing about the tragedy beforehand. This is nothing to be proud of. That the most senior GM executives may not have known about a defect that caused more than a dozen deaths is frankly alarming and does not absolve them of responsibility for this tragedy. Ms. Barra, while you are a new CEO, you have a decades-long history with GM. From 2011, you were Executive Vice President of Global Product Development, and the GM staff responsible for vehicle safety reported either directly or through a chain of command to you. At least one high-level executive who was working on solutions to the ignition switch problem reported directly to you. So while you may not have known about this defect, many people who worked for you did. The culture of a company is shaped by its senior leadership. They set the tone and shape the attitudes of the employees. They are also responsible for putting in place systems to foster transparency and ensure that safety issues are taken seriously. Those systems failed at GM. Today, what I want to know are specific answers to how the culture of secrecy at GM can be changed to encourage reporting of problems, not just structural management changes. I appreciate, Ms. Barra, the changes you've made at GM so far, but I think the jury is still out on whether we can have success in changing the culture. Last week, as the chairman mentioned, GM announced the recall of over 500,000 late-model Chevy Camaros, including 2014 model year vehicles, because of ignition switch problems. And Monday evening, just a couple days ago, another 3.3 million cars with ignition switch and engine shutoff issues were recalled, including Chevy Impalas that are currently in production. This means that this year alone, GM has announced 44 recalls affecting more than 20 million vehicles worldwide. Ms. Barra, this record reinforces the notion that the safety problems with the Cobalt and Ion were not unique at GM, and that the senior executives at the company, including you, should have acted sooner to resolve the company's culture. So now, we need to show the American public that the changes that have been announced will really address the long-standing problems at GM. Mr. Chairman, Ms. Barra is not the only one with work to do. This committee should get to work on legislation to address the findings of our investigation. And in these last few minutes, I also want to acknowledge the families who are here in the hearing room today and their beloved loved ones with the pictures on the back wall there. I know it's not easy for you to learn about so many things that went wrong at GM. you have my word that we'll do our best to make sure that this kind of tragedy will never, never happen again. And Mr. Chairman, I know that we can work together in a bipartisan way to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Gentlelady's time has expired. Now recognize the